The silence within the ancient Egyptian tomb had a weight unlike anything you had ever felt, a cold promise clawing at the back of your mind, even before your eyes fully adjusted to the dimness surrounding you. You felt the roughness of the stone beneath your fingertips, cold and unyielding, as if the walls themselves were alive, squeezing the breath from the air. A faint whisper of dust floated in the stale atmosphere, mingling with the faint, irregular drip of moisture from the ceiling, the distant scrape of shifting sand settling after untold centuries. The texture of the cool marble against your palms contrasted with the grainy, suffocating sand that had gathered near your feet, creating a cruel cocoon that held you in place. The air hung thick, stale and heavy, pressing against your skin like a damp blanket suffused with the scent of age and forgotten ritual. Your breath came heavier, each inhalation drawing in the faint odor of ancient stone and smoke, the ghost of sacred ceremonies long past that had ensnared your very spirit. You felt the weight of your own body in this strange, eternal slumber, immobilized as if you had become part of the statues themselves. You tried to move, to free your limbs, but the cold stone clasped your hands firmly, unyielding in its silent grip. The very concept of time began to blur. Minutes melted into hours, hours stretched into endless echoes. Your mind traced back to how you had come to this place. The hesitant steps along the corridor, fingertips gliding over weathered hieroglyphs, barely legible in the faint light. The nearly imperceptible pulse of hope resting fragile at your core. Outside these tomb walls, the world moved with violent haste. A memory that brought you a quiet, wry thought. If today a dead phone battery could send a shudder through your very day, how much greater was the torment of eternal stillness, the unbearable weight pressed into stone in silence. Your thoughts circled slowly, repetitively, as you shuffled minuscule movements to adjust your position in the suffocating tight space. You caught yourself examining, again, the tiny chips in the carved stone, the texture of your binding, the faintest sounds outside the chamber's mouth. Just wind, or something more? Ahead, a shift whispered through the shadows, the sudden cessation of the muffled scratching noise that had marked the tomb's stillness. No dogs barked. No distant footsteps stirred the brittle sand. The darkness itself seemed to breathe in threatening silence, as if unseen eyes watched from the periphery. A subtle glance might have passed among the sculptures themselves, their stiff, painted eyes turning toward you, the trapped spirit. You realized then that your ordeal was far from over, that this silence was a breath held before something waiting, inevitable and unseen. Antes que Morfeu te pegue de vez, dá uma conferida rápida se você continua inscrito. Para alguns o botão sumiu e eu não quero que você perca as próximas histórias para dormir. Aproveita e deixa um like macio como um travesseiro. Me conta nos comentários. De onde você nos ouve e que horas são aí? Sua interação mantém este cantinho de calma vivo. Valeu por fazer parte. The silence stretched taut beneath the weight of ancient stone. Every breath you drew dragging slowly through the thick, stagnant air, a shiver traced your spine, even before the faintest movement stirred the shadows. Your senses sharpened, stretched wide into the darkness. The carved faces on the walls seemed to lean forward imperceptibly, their hollow eyes pulling your gaze. Watchful, unblinking, you felt your fingertips brush the cold limestone again, grainy beneath your skin, like the whispers of a forgotten past trapped in every crease. The scent of burnt resin deepened, wrapping around you like a ghostly embrace, its bitterness clinging to the dampness in the air. The faint drip of water echoed through the chamber, slow and irregular, each drop a measured stroke, marking time against your ears. You noticed the faint scratch of shifting sand at the threshold, barely audible, as if the desert itself breathed and settled, never fully at rest. Your breath caught. You were alone here, with the statues, with the dust, and with the silence that pressed into your chest like a heavy stone. A shudder passed over your skin as a low draft wound through the cramped space, carrying with it the faintest trace of heat, a warmth so small it was almost imagined, flickering like a candle flame. In the distance, you adjusted slightly, the rough edges of the stone biting lightly into your palms. Your shoulders ached, still cramped from hours of forced stillness, but every motion felt like pressing against the slow-moving weight of the tomb itself. Your eyes caught sight of shifting shadows near the entrance, where the faintest thread of light leaked from the corridor beyond. The darkness seemed to ripple and breathe, folding inward like a living cloak pulled tight against your skin. Something hovered there, a shape, or perhaps a trick of the dim flicker, that slipped across the edge of your vision and vanished. You blinked, and the silence swallowed the moment whole. The air thickened further, carrying a muted chorus of distant creaks and groans. The tomb was settling, ages compressing in slow increments, and you felt your heartbeat echo in your ears, steady yet fragile. The sticky scent of resin mingled now with the faintest hint of earth, damp and loamy, like the graveyard beyond the walls. You pressed your palm flat against the floor, the stone cold but grounding, its smoothness a faint contrast to the sharp grains of sand clinging to your fingers. You noticed a cluster of tiny cracks spiderwebbing around a broken hieroglyph, the edges softened by time's slow erosion. Your hand trembled slightly as you traced the ancient carvings, the familiar weight of fear and awe mingling quietly. The silence was not empty, it was waiting. Just beyond your reach, the subtle shifting began anew. You felt it then, a faint draft, the stir of air that carried a whisper of movement, soft and deliberate. The walls seemed to exhale, slowly, as if awakening from a timeless slumber. You closed your eyes briefly, the rough stone pressing against your eyelids. The world reduced to the symphony of your breathing and the distant, unbroken quiet. Your thoughts drifted back to the narrow path that had led you here. The sequence of hesitant steps, the scraping of sand underfoot, and the flicker of torchlight etched on cracked walls. You remember the tight grasp of fear in your chest, the bitter taste of dry air in your mouth, and the weight in your hands, the relic clasped as tightly as the stone now holding you still. Your fingers flexed against the bindings that bit into your wrists, the coarse texture of the fabric rough against your skin. You tested their resistance. 6 seconds. Subtle movements, shifting the weight of your arms minutely. The tightness unyielding, but alive with a faint hum of constriction. You thought of the stories told in whispers back home. Ancient curses meant to trap wayfarers, to bind souls beneath the sands. The thought trembled in your mind like a loose stone. A soft glimmer caught your eye, faint yet steady, a pinprick of pale light dancing on the far wall. You turned your head just enough to watch the small flame flickering steadily, casting long shadows that crawled sluggishly like creeping ivy. The warmth it offered was a fragile promise, a brief relief from the all-encompassing cold. You exhaled slowly, the breath stretching into a drawn-out sigh that mingled with the stale air. The sound of the drip shifted, quickening in irregular bursts, as if something unseen disturbed the damp ceiling. A faint scraping mingled with it, a whisper against the stone, like fingernails pressing softly against dry bark. Your heart nudged tighter in your chest, a slow, deliberate beat that echoed in the hollow quiet. You could almost feel a presence there, just beyond the veil of shadows. Your fingers brushed over the carved face of a figure in limestone, the fine cracks, like frozen veins, tracing paths across its frozen expression. You rested your cheek against the cold stone, tasting the texture beneath your skin, the roughness a steady, grounding reality. The slight gritty sensation roused your senses, drawing your attention away from the endless blackness beyond. The silence thickened again, a held breath in the vast stillness. You noticed the temperature shift subtly, a coolness crawling from your feet upward, the slow seep of cold sinking deeper and deeper, as if the tomb itself was breathing out its chill. Your movements slowed, measured, weighted with purpose, yet tinged with caution. You dared a subtle shift forward, the pressure of sandy grains slipping quietly beneath your fingers, the sound thin, like a whispered secret shared between the stone and the earth. The walls seemed to bend inward just a fraction, narrowing your path. And the flicker of that distant torch wavered again, long enough for you to catch a shudder in the air, something moving unseen. Then a distant, muted rumble echoed softly, barely audible, but unmistakable, a slow, deliberate vibration beneath your feet, as if the tomb itself had drawn a breath and begun to stir once more. You paused, the statues around you leaned ever so slightly, shadows pooling deeper in their hollow eyes, the weight of waiting, heavy as the cold stone, pressed down without mercy. And you knew whatever had been silent was no longer still. The distant rumble lingered in the air, a low vibration that seemed to pulse beneath the cold stone, stirring something ancient and patient just out of sight. You tightened your grip on the rough surface beneath your fingers, the texture unyielding and sharply irregular, as dust drifted down like a faint shower from the ceiling above. Every breath pulled the stale air deeper into your lungs, thick with the bitter scent of resin and the faint tang of damp earth creeping in from beyond these sealed walls. The silence pressed around you, heavy and unrelenting, yet beneath it all, a restless heartbeat echoed. Yours, steady and fragile, pushed to the edge of endurance. Subtle shifts played around the edges of your vision. The carved faces, once still and impenetrable, now seemed to lean just enough to catch a flicker of movement. Their stone eyes, hollow but resolute, held you captive in their cold gaze, demanding patience. You pressed your cheek again against the coarse limestone, tracing a slow circle with your fingertips over an ancient crack that spiderwebbed beneath the faded hieroglyphs. The familiar weight of your bindings chafed softly against your wrists, rough fibers digging deeper with each subtle adjustment you made, your arms craving any freedom your careful movements might bring. A cool draft slid across the chamber floor like a whisper, stirring the fine grains of sand that had settled near your feet. Its touch was faint but insistent, carrying with it an almost imperceptible warmth, like a fragile ember hidden beneath layers of ash. You closed your eyes briefly, drawing the breath out long and slow, feeling the cold seep inward and mix with that quiet heat. A paradox under your skin. The tomb around you settled in waves, dust falling slowly, walls groaning in tired echoes. Time twisted on itself, curling and curling, until minutes dissolved into an indistinct hum of waiting. You shifted a fraction, the edges of the sandy floor crunching softly as you squeezed your feet against the grainy earth. The air shifted again, stirring ghostly patterns of shadow across the limestone carvings. You noticed the faintest flicker of light, not a flame, but a pale glow that seemed to rise slowly along the far wall, drawing your eyes with its hesitant pulse. It was a sliver of hope in this endless twilight, yet it carried a strange heaviness, a quiet warning wrapped in its faint illumination. Your chest tightened with the slow march of approaching pressure. The statues around you, frozen watchers bound by stone and memory, seemed to lean forward, their features sharpened by shadows, lips pressed in silent counsel. Your breath hesitated as the moisture gathered on your skin, cold and damping the fine hairs along your arms. The delicate scraping sound at the chamber's threshold returned, a barely there friction, as if the desert sands outside were fumbling in the dark, scratching at the very mouth of the tomb. A soft breath escaped your lips, mingling with the thick air. You tested your bindings again, fingers flexing against the stubborn resistance, the rough weave unchanged but pulsing faintly as if alive. The memory of old tales rose unbidden, curses whispered in flickering campfires, warnings etched in stories meant to keep wanderers at bay. You pressed your palm on the floor, the chill biting, and let your fingers wander slowly along chipped glyphs, tracing the slow erosion of time's quiet hand. Every symbol seemed to whisper fragments in a language you just barely recognized, an echo of voices long swallowed by the deep silence. Beneath your ear, a faint vibration bubbled once more through the floor, like a pulse beneath the dust, deliberate and patient. The shadows thickened at the fringes of your sight, gathering into shapes that threatened the edges of perception. You resisted the urge to snap, your head toward the corner where pale light quivered, instead holding steady, grounding yourself in the weight of the stone beneath and the rough texture of the sand slipping softly through your fingers. The faint glow wavered, revealing more of the crumbling mural painted centuries ago, the twisted limbs of God and man entwined. Colors faded to ghostly pastels. The scent of resin grew sharper, almost clinging in layers now, as if the ancient ceremony that sealed this place were waking slowly, breathing its final curse. Your chest rose and fell with deliberate slowness, each breath a tether to the world still clinging outside these walls. Then, barely audible, a faint shift. Something moved beyond the edge of shadow, a breath of sound like dry leaves scraping over stones. Your pulse quickened in the claustrophobic. Quiet, nerves sharpening every small sensation. Was it merely the settling of ancient foundations, or something else slipping closer, patient and unseen? Your fingers tightened briefly on the sand, grains slipping between them like time itself bleeding away. You tested your strength, a minute shift forward, and felt the rough edge of something metallic beneath the sand. Fingers trembling, you brushed the grains aside slowly, revealing a fragment of aged bronze. Its surface mottled with verdigris, but undeniably crafted by human hands. The cold metal was a contrast to the dry stone, a remnant of a presence once vibrant, now forgotten, but not gone. Your breath hitched as the floor thrummed softly again, steady and insistent, as if the tomb itself was a heart beating slowly in the dark. Around you, the statues seemed to lean closer, their silent chorus rising in mute vigilance. The air grew thick, resin clinging to every inhalation. A distant hum vibrated through the chamber, rising beneath the stone in deliberate cadence. You felt it under your feet, the slow stirring of something immense, patient and restless. The shadows knotted tighter, weaving tendrils of dark around the faint light, swallowing it, inch by inch. And then, fleeting at the edge of your hearing, the whisper came, soft, undulating, a voice older than any spoken word, a drawing breath in the silence, waiting. The faint vibration beneath your feet lingered, steady and insistent, like the heartbeat of the tomb itself, slow but awakening. You pressed your palm more firmly against the cold stone floor, feeling its roughness bite gently into your skin, grounding you in the unbearable stillness around. Dust fell in tiny cascades from the cracked ceiling above, grains slipping through your fingers with a softness that contrasted the harsh reality binding you here. Each breath you took seemed heavier than the last, thick with the sting of burnt resin and the earthy dampness of unseen soil seeping in beyond the walls. Your eyes traced the slow dance of shadows across the carved limestone figures, their worn faces seeming to breathe with quiet vigilance. The chill in the air crept upward along your arms, prickling the fine hairs and sharpening every nerve. You felt the tight weave of your bindings pull against the delicate shift of your wrists as you tested them again with the smallest possible movement. A careful stretch, a supplication not come. The rough fibers dug deep into your skin, a constant reminder of your stillness, your slowness, and the invisible trap laid here long before your arrival. A faint, scraping sound returned at the chamber's entrance, a hesitant, thin whisper of sand against stone, as if the desert's breath was reaching through the cracks, scratching softly at the tomb's threshold. You dared not turn your head fully. Instead, you let your gaze linger on the jagged shadows flickering there. In that quiet corner, pale light wavered, a fragile glow, neither flame nor torch, casting uncertain shapes that stretched like tendrils of smoke across the ancient floor. Your breath caught as the air shifted, bringing with it a subtle warmth mingled with the cold, so fleeting you could have mistaken it for a trick of your mind. It teased your skin like the distant memory of a sunbeam falling across your face, soft and diffused. For a brief moment, hope flickered, fragile ember amid the oppressive darkness. But the silence bore its own weight, heavier now, pressing against your chest like an iron bar wrapped in velvet, both firm and suffocating. The carved faces on the walls seemed to lean closer, their eyes hollow yet piercing, whispering mute warnings through the centuries. You traced your fingers slowly over a chipped glyph near your knee, its edges blurred by time's endless erosion. The rough stone rasped softly beneath your skin, each ridge and crack a quiet echo of long-forgotten rituals, the breath of other souls long claimed by this place. A slow, irregular drip of moisture echoed faintly, marking time against the vast stillness. The rhythm was uneven, like a faltering heartbeat that matched your own tightening pulse. You sense the tomb settling further, shifting imperceptibly in slow waves, walls groaning under centuries of weight, dust cascading in whispers like spectral rain. A low murmur seemed to stir beneath the surface of the stone itself, as if the tomb were alive, breathing through its cracked veins, waiting beyond the edge of perception. You shifted your weight slightly, feeling the rough sand yield beneath your fingers, grains slipping quietly like secrets told between the earth and the cold floor. The air thickened, saturated with the acrid scent of burnt resin, now undeniable, almost choking. The once distant glow pulsed gently, swelling with a strange, rhythmic heartbeat that synchronized with the vibrations beneath your feet. Your mind flicked back to the relic clenched tightly in your hand before you were trapped. An aged fragment of bronze, mottled with verdigris, cold and foreign against her skin. It was a tangible link to a past still lingering here, something crafted with intent and purpose, now buried beneath layers of dust and silence. The weight of its history pressed on your thoughts, dense and immovable, as if the tomb had swallowed not only your body, but the stories you carried. The statues around you seemed to lean, shadows deepening in their hollow eyes as the air grew languid and dense. The faint scratches at the chamber's mouth grew louder, more deliberate, a soft, persistent drag like fabric scraping stone. Your breath slowed, elongated, each inhale drawn deep and steady as you focused on the subtle chorus of sounds. The drip, the scrape, the murmurs etched into the fabric of the tomb. A shift, a flutter of air passed close. You felt the walls exhale around you, a slow pulse of ancient life rattling the dust and loosening the stale air. Turning your gaze once more to the pale glow, you saw shapes materializing, faint at first, but tightening into something almost tangible. A shimmer of movement along the far wall, tracing the outlines of faded murals, depicting twisted limbs of gods and men, entwined in eternal struggle. The resin scent sharpened, a bitter promise woven with the damp earth's musk. Your heartbeat steadied, each thump a tether in the overwhelming blackness. A breath drawn deep and held, then released slowly, a sigh that mingled with the waiting air. Suddenly, the floor beneath you vibrated more forcefully, a slow rumble pulsing through your bones and into your breath. The statue's silent watch sharpened into palpable presence, shadows pooling and curling as if coming alive under the slumbering weight of time. You heard it then, a faint, undulating whisper, a voice older than language, threading through the tomb's stillness, a silent summons carried in the breath of the air. Your fingers trembled against the stone as you pressed downward, feeling the pulse grow sharper, more urgent. The shadows knotted closer around the flickering light, darkness swallowing the edges of the fragile glow until only the murmur remained, soft, steady, and impossible to ignore. And in that murmur, you knew the silence was not emptiness. It was waiting. The murmur of movement seemed to ripple beneath the dense silence, pressing into your skin like a slow, tidal pulse. You shifted subtly, careful not to disturb the brittle sand gathered at your feet, its grainy texture slipping softly with the faintest touch. Cold stone embraced your cheek as your fingertips traced the fractured carvings again, each crack whispering stories etched long before your time. A faint tang of burnt resin thickened in the air, wrapping itself around your senses like a lingering shadow. Your breath caught in a shallow rhythm, every inhale drawing in the heavy scent of earth and ancient smoke, every exhale dispersing into the tomb's stagnant stillness. The statues around you, silent sentinels of an age lost, loomed close in your vision, faces etched with solemn watchfulness, their hollow eyes carved from granite shadows. The faintest stir at the chamber's mouth caused your heart to tighten, a slow drumbeat echoing in the hollow cavity of your chest. The air shifted again, a subtle draft curling in from the narrow corridor beyond, carrying with it a faint warmth, tinged with dust and something less definable, an almost imperceptible breath of life within the stone's cold grasp. Your fingers pressed harder into the rough surface beneath you, grounding yourself in the reality of the coarse limestone, the granular sand sliding softly across your skin. Each movement was deliberate, slowed to a rhythm measured by the creeping weight of time pressing in all around. As your gaze lingered on the fractured glyphs beneath your palm, a faint shimmer caught your eye, a wavering coil of pale light flickering along the wall's surface like a hesitant flame. It pulsed gently, steady yet fragile, casting long limbs of shadow that crawled lazily across the worn stone floor. The warmth it gifted was tenuous, a delicate promise amidst the choking cold, faintly comforting, yet fleeting like the memory of a sunbeam through dusty glass. The slow drips of moisture from the ceiling intensified, falling in uneven rhythm, their hollow taps marking the passage of moments stretched wide. You became attuned to the smallest sounds, the gentle scrape of sandy grains shifting beneath invisible footsteps outside, the whispering rustle of unseen fabric brushing against stone, the muted groan of the tomb, as if taking an immense breath in preparation for something vast and unseen. The lingering scent of burnt resin grew almost cloying, weaving with the must of earth that had seeped through cracks, infusing the air with layers of forgotten ritual and decay. Your shoulders ached from hours of restrained stillness, every slight shift weighted by the tomb's embrace. You tested your bindings again, the rough fibers chafing as your wrists inched against their limits. The coarse texture dug with quiet insistence, a tactile reminder that movement here was a contest against invisible chains. Your hands trembled faintly, the warmth of your skin contrasting with the chill of stone pressing hard beneath your cheek. Farther down, near where the faint glow wavered, you detected a faint pattern emerging, an ancient mural, dulled with time, but still alive in flickers of pigment, portrayed gods and mortals intertwined in eternal struggle. The faded hues seemed to breathe in the faint illumination, the twisted limbs and faces etched into plaster, whispering of battles long ended, yet never forgotten. The scent deepened, the resin's bitterness mingling with the damp clay musk, a scent as old as the tomb itself, suffocating yet sacred. A breath escaped you, slow and measured, the faint exhale mingling with the stale air. The cold sank deeper into your bones as the floor beneath you thrummed once more, a quiet vibration that seemed to strain against the weight of centuries. The statues, mere stone and dust, felt less like inert watchers and more like patient guardians, silent yet sentient, their gaze tethered tightly to your presence, pulling you ever inward. Suddenly, a faint whisper slid through the gloom, soft, undulating, like dry leaves skimming stone. Your pulse accelerated with a delicate urgency, every nerve on fire but controlled, bound by the slow, dragging weight of caution. The shadows grew denser around the flickering light, tendrils of darkness curling in slow spirals to claim the fragile glow. Your breath shortened momentarily, but you forced it out, long and even, a lifeline snaking through the confining silence. Your fingers brushed the bronze fragment again, half buried beneath fine sand. The cool metal, mottled and ancient, was a sharp contrast to the yielding grains, its surface whispering of lives long past, hands that shaped history, now lost beneath the tomb's endless vigil. You traced its edge thrice, the act slow and meditative, each movement a deliberate ritual of remembrance and hope. The distant rumble deepened, vibrating through the floor and creeping upward, sinking through every muscle and bone like the heartbeat of some colossal, slumbering entity. The very air seemed to pulse in tandem with that unyielding rhythm, thickening until each breath was a slow draw through a viscous veil. The statue's eyes, carved dark and hollow, seemed to glint faintly in the muted light, shadows pooling and crinkling as if life stirred beneath their stone skin. A soft shudder rippled through the walls. The cavern chilled abruptly as the subtle warmth from the hall faltered and died. In the enveloping gloom, the faint illumination flickered violently once. then caught steady again. But now the trembling shadows were not quite alone. You sensed it, more than saw it, a shape swaying faintly at the extremity of your vision, draped in quiet menace, a slow pulse of silent breath just beyond the grasp of perception. Your heart caught against ribs that felt hollow and wide. Time dilated in the heavy tomb as the slow breath hung between moments. A fragile thread pulled taut with unseen weight. And in the trembling silence that followed, when your eyes strained and the shadows seemed to lean closer, yet did not move closer still, you understood this waiting was no longer passive. It was turning toward you. The shadows settled deeper as the slow rumble beneath you faded into a lingering vibration. A faint heartbeat echoing through the miles of stone and dust that cocooned you. The cool stone pressed against your cheek, firm but unyielding, and the rough grains of sand slipped softly between your fingers, coarse and shifting. Your breath stretched long and measured, each inhale drawing in the bitter scent of burnt resin mixed with the damp earth, a stubborn reminder of the secrets held tight within these ancient walls. You shifted just enough to ease the ache in your shoulders, feeling the strained fibers of your bindings rasp softly, biting into your wrists like cold wire. The stone beneath your palms was chipped and flaky from centuries too many, yet every ridge felt alive with history, each crack a twisted story, frozen just beyond reach. You traced the slow erosion of faded hieroglyphs, the lines curling and curling like tendrils weaving through time itself. A faint flicker caught your eye, wistful and uncertain, like a candle flame struggling to fend off the swallowing dark. It danced along the far wall, casting slow, reaching shadows that crawled on the cracked floor like tired fingers. You leaned your head closer, savoring the rare warmth it breathed, soft, ephemeral, and fleeting against the chill that lingered in the cramped air. The silence around you thickened, drawing tight like a thread wound taut, until a gentle scrape stirred the threshold, the faintest brushing of sand and stone, as if the desert beyond exhaled a quiet breath. The air trembled faintly with this welcome disturbance. Your heartbeat time-shifted, pulsing slow and steady, pacing itself against the tomb's immovable stillness. You allowed your fingers to flex gently, testing again the rough constriction binding your movements. The coarse texture was indifferent, unrelenting, carrying an invisible weight that seemed bound to the stone itself. Your hands trembled lightly, muscles aching for reprieve, while your mind clung to the fragile thread of hope flickering in the dim light. Nearer still, the slow drip of damp water pattering. Like a hesitant rhythm, traced reluctant melodies across the floor. Each drop waxed and waned in sound, a lullaby composed by time and decay. You pressed your palm to the stone once more, grounding yourself in its solidity, pushing back against the sea of shadows that curled inward with silent patience. The faint glow pulsed again, steadier now, revealing more of the fading mural painted centuries past, a chaotic dance of gods and mortals tangled in everlasting strife. The colors, once vibrant, now blurred into soft pastels, their shapes wavering like reflections seen through rippling water. You imagined the ancient hands that had carved these tales, now long cold, their stories lingering in every chipped face and worn edge. The scent of burnt resin deepened, bitter and acrid, laying a heavy blanket over the stale, damp air. It clung to your throat, stubborn as a whispered curse, entwining with the musty earth odor that seeped from cracks unseen. Your skin prickled as the temperature shifted, a subtle draught of warmth slipping away like smoke on a breeze, giving way to a creeping cold that seemed to sweep upward from the depths of the tomb. The statues surrounding you remained still, yet their hollow gazes seemed sharpened, more intent. You could feel the space press inward, the walls bending with ancient patience, tactile ghost of a life long past. The sharp contrast of metal and sand under your skin offered a momentary anchor, a tactile memory to steady your frayed awareness. You let your fingertips linger, adhering to the weight of history ensnared in rust. Beneath you, the low vibration grew, pulsing with slow urgency, echoing through muscle and bone with a relentless rhythm. The tomb's breath expanded, subtle and immense, stirring as if the ancient heart within had wakened from a long and patient slumber. The faint light flickered violently once, then steadied, a fragile beacon amid tightening shadows. At the edge of your vision, a figure swayed, a vague, shifting silhouette that gathered stillness like ink pooling in water. It lingered, silent and foreboding, a slow, deliberate presence just beyond perception. Your skin tightened, your chest contracted with a careful stillness, your heartbeat reluctant and sharp beneath ribs grown brittle with time. The air shuddered, thickening into an almost suffocating cloak, as the warm thread of light died once again. Darkness pressed closer, weaving tendrils that swallowed residual glow with steady, unyielding hunger. In that enveloping gloom, every sound amplified, the muted scrape of sand, the soft rasp of stone settling, the whispered murmur crawling beneath the surface like breath held too long. Your hand tightened around the relic, the cold metal biting with a fierce clarity. You sensed the statues leaning in, their silent judgment narrowing the cavern around you. The waiting, once patient, now brimmed with imminent motion. And then, in the hollow silence before the next breath, you heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, an intimation of movement, soft and deliberate, curling upward from the depths. The darkness quivered, the stillness fractured, and you knew with a growing certainty, whatever had been waiting was no longer just watching. It was turning toward you. The shifting shape at the edge of your vision lingers just beyond the fragile glow, a motion traced more in the periphery than in clear form. You feel the air tighten around you, thick, viscous, as if the very atmosphere has conspired to bind your senses into a delicate, tense stillness. The flicker of pale light quivers, casting slow, trembling shadows that reach across the cracked floor, like hesitant fingers searching for purchase. The statues, silent and eternal, seem to lean imperceptibly closer, their worn faces etched with unreadable intent, hollow eyes. Your breath comes slow, deliberate, almost reluctant, each inhalation a measured draft, pulling the ancient sense deeper into your lungs. The bitter tickle of burnt resin, the musty earth's cool dampness, and beneath it all, the persistent, faint warmth, an ember hidden, fragile as hope. The chill crawling along your skin from beneath rises gradually, coiling through your muscles as if the tomb exhales its cold breath through the centuries. Your fingers flex tentatively against the rough fibers binding your wrists, the coarse grains of sand shifting silently beneath, the tactile reminder of your unyielding captivity. A soft, uneven drip echoes from the ceiling, the sound stretched thin across the heavy stillness. A fractured heartbeat, marking time measured in breaths and slow pulses of patience. The air stirs lightly once more, draft weaving in from the entrance, carrying with it a whisper of sound, like fabric rubbing softly against stone, or maybe distant sand settling in the desert's ceaseless shifts. Your eyes trace the creeping shadows that fold concentrically inward, gathering weight, as the faint glow toward the hallway fluctuates, now growing stronger, then flickering uncertainly back to pale frailty. You manage a subtle shift, pressing a palm against the cool floor, its rough limestone surface catching the skin with a grit that feels alive, textured with mystery and centuries of secrets pressed deep into its veins. The sand beneath your fingers slips quietly, tiny grains refusing to settle entirely, restless like memories that refuse to fade. Your gaze moves to the fragment of bronze lying next to your hand, greened with verdigris but still cold and substantial, a small anchor in this sea of stillness. Running the tip of your finger along its uneven edge, you feel a pulse thrumming faintly beneath the surface, as if the relic itself holds breath beneath layers of dust. The statues cast long, watchful shadows that pool and twist with the flickering light. Their silent vigil feels less like simple stone and more an ancient guardian's weight, pressing invisibly on your shoulders. The scent of resin sharpens, sour and biting now, layered thickly with the damp clay musk, like a veil woven from ritual flame and earth's secret rot. You can feel the tomb settling, tiny tremors vibrating through the floor, each breath of motion a slow convergence toward whatever stirs beyond the edges of sight. Your muscles ache steadily from the enforced stillness, shoulders stiff and protesting the faint shifts you wage against your bonds. Yet every movement is a drawn-out negotiation with the very air, each flex and stretch measured, silent, as if the tomb itself resists disturbance. The cold stone at your cheek is a constant, grounding presence, the rough texture biting gently into your skin with every scant gesture, while the fine hair along your arms stands alert in the gathering tension. Then, unmistakably, a soft sound cuts through the quiet, the scrape of stone against stone. Slower, more deliberate than the careless fall of sand. It rustles like dry leaves caught in a hesitant breeze, curling and unfurling delicately near the entrance. Your heart hammers, faint yet relentless, pulsing in your ears like a drum pressed against the hollow chamber. The very air seems to contract, the shadows deepening until they nearly swallow the flickering flame whole. The glow dims, then steadies, a thin but steadfast thread of light that threads small fingers of warmth through the chilled air. The fading mural near that light shivers under the illumination, its faded gods and tortured mortals entwined in an eternal, silent dance. The colors blur and shimmer like ghosts' breath on cold glass. And you taste the weight of untold ages in the bitter tang that clings at the back of your throat. Your fingers tighten on the bronze, the metal's cold, stark against your skin, now a shivering contrast to the growing warmth near the passageway. Your thoughts drift briefly to the relic's origin, hands long dead who forged it, lives reduced to echoes, whispering beneath your touch. The tomb groans softly, waves of ancient stone contracting after aeons of silence, and the floor vibrates again under you, a low rolling cadence that stirs your very bones. The statue's shadows coil more heavily, pressing like ink spilled slowly across parchment. You sense a movement that is neither seen nor heard, only felt, something folding inward from the depths, a patient presence poised just beyond the boundaries of your perception. The coldness seizes a final tendril of warmth, swallowing it whole, leaving only the faintest ember glimmering in the pressing dark. And then you hear it, a breath drawn slow and deep, rising somewhere beneath the floor. Not a sound loud enough to carry, but one heavy with ancient promise and quiet threat. Fades until the room plunges into shadow, leaving you suspended in the thick, waiting silence. You know without seeing, the waiting is no longer idle. It has turned, the darkness thickened, swallowing the faint pulse of light until only a distant glimmer remained, fragile and hesitant, like the last breath of a dying star. You felt it then, a slow tightening in the air, dense and deliberate, curling around your skin like a chill whispered through ancient stone. The weight of silence was no longer passive. It pressed inward, folding closer with the subtle insistence of unseen fingers tracing the edges of your awareness. Your fingers clenched the cold bronze fragment again, the rough metal nudging steady beneath your touch, barely warmer than the stone beneath your cheek. You traced its worn edges with care, the faint verdigris whispering stories of hands long gone, fingers that had once shaped fate here in these terrible, quiet halls. The binding fibers dug into your wrists with familiar sharpness, frustrating every smallest effort to flex free, reminding you how firmly the tomb claimed not only your body, but your breath. A soft, uneven rumble quivered beneath your feet, a vibration rising slowly through bone and muscle, a heartbeat measured and ancient. The limestone floor shifted imperceptibly, sand sliding faintly into fine, restless patterns that whispered of restless histories buried just beneath the surface. You held your breath with deliberate slowness, counting the stretch of seconds as the stillness around you rippled in tension. The carved figures leaned a fraction closer, their stone faces half swallowed by shadows that pooled and stretched like creeping ivy. Their hollow eyes, once mere emptiness, now seemed to hold a quiet sentinel's patience, watching, waiting. The bitter scent of burnt resin deepened strangely, its acrid tang mingling with the cool dampness seeping through cracks in the ancient walls, a scent that clung to the air like a warning, whispered in a voice without words. You pressed your palm flat against the rough floor, feeling the gritty texture slip slowly beneath your skin like sifting time itself. The chill rose from the stone, curling upward in slow waves, and beneath it you felt something palpable, a pulse, a rhythm not your own, beating steady and sure, like the breath of the tomb itself. The silence around you was no longer empty. It had gathered purpose. Your gaze flicked to the faint glow near the entrance, where pale light wavered like a breath frozen between flicker and fade. Within its fragile illumination, shadows tangled and writhed, forming shapes both indistinct and alive. Something moved there, not with haste, but with an ancient deliberation, a slow, patient ripple that brushed the edges of your vision before retreating into deeper darkness. The air pulsed thickly in response, the scent of earth and smoke swirling as if exhaling a long-held secret. A low stir brushed across the chamber threshold, a scrape, shuffling soft as dry leaves falling apart in the desert wind. Your pulse quickened, slow and steady, thrumming against ribs that felt hollow and tight. The statue's silent vigil weighed heavily now, their presence more than stone. They were sentinels of memory, bound in stillness. But, alive in their watchfulness, you felt the cold seep deeper, coiling around your spine and curling into the hollow ache at your chest. Your shoulders protested against hours of immobility, muscles trembling with the itch of strain beneath bindings that refused to yield. Each shift was a negotiation with the tomb's slow-moving weight, measured, patient, stretched long across time without mercy. The faint illumination pulsed once more, steadying, revealing chipped frescoes along the far wall. Writhing limbs of gods and mortals entangled in an eternal dance of shadow and light. The colors were ghostly pastels blurred by centuries, the images faint but persistent as the whispers of long-dead voices carried through brittle air. The resin's bitterness gnawed at your senses like a soft curse, wrapping tight with the damp musk of earth and age. Your fingers tightened around the bronze relic, its cold weight anchoring you amid the gathering tides of shadow. The metal's chill pressed against your skin, a stark contrast to the slow warmth flickering near the hall's mouth. In that tactile contact, you found a thread of something almost forgotten, hope or memory, that pulsed faintly beneath your touch. The ground thrummed again, the slow rumble growing deeper, shaking through flesh and bone, stirring silent dust in quiet spirals. The statue's shadows writhed and nodded, pooling thicker and denser like ink bleeding across parchment. You sensed a tendril of motion folding inward from the deep gloom, patient and poised, narrowing its gaze. The balance of warmth and cold wavered. Then the flicker of light dimmed and vanished, swallowed by tendrils of darkness, drawn tight. Shroud. The chamber became a hollow shell filled with the sound of your measured breath and the whispered murmur curling beneath stone. Each heartbeat echoed, steady and sharp, hammering against the limits of this suspended moment. Then, from somewhere beyond perception, an almost imperceptible sound, the sigh of breath drawn slow and deep, a breath not your own, rising from the depths to meet the silence, carrying with it a promise old and terrible. The air thickened, charged with that slow, inevitable arrival. Your skin prickled, every nerve alive in heightened vigil. The shadows didn't merely lean closer, they shifted, gathering weight and will like a slow tide preparing to turn. And in the hollow silence, before the slow-moving shape resolved itself fully, before the ancient breath left the deep unseen, you knew, without opening your eyes, that the waiting was over. It was no longer watching. It was turning toward you. The slow pulse beneath your feet eased into a lingering hum, a gentle reminder that the tomb's breath, though ancient and heavy, had found peace once again. You pressed your palm against the cold limestone, feeling the familiar grit beneath your skin, a tactile anchor that tethered you to this moment, to the fragile thread of life surviving between stone and shadow. The soft light you had tracked through the gloom steadied, no longer flickering, but glowing with a calm resolve. It painted the weary mural in a tender wash of faded pastels, revealing the twisted forms of gods and men locked forever in their silent, eternal dance. Yet now, the tension that had gripped the chamber softened, as though the stories carved into the walls had finally found their end. Your breath fell into a slow rhythm, steady and measured, the acrid scent of resin retreating into a quiet memory, mingling with the faint, earthy musk. The chill that had seeped so insistently into your bones lifted like the first warmth of dawn, nudging away the night's fatigue. You felt the bindings loosen subtly, the rough fibers no longer biting as sharply. But you made no sudden move. Instead, you let the peace settle over your senses like a soft quilt, the stillness now a companion rather than a captor. The statues surrounding you, those silent sentinels of time, seemed less like guardians of dread and more like witnesses to your passage through shadow and light. Hollow eyes, once piercing and unyielding, now held a gentle watchfulness, a reverence folded deep in stone. You traced your fingertips over one weathered face, feeling the voice of ages, old as the desert itself, whisper in the cracks. There was no menace here anymore, only the soft echo of finality. Below your hand, the bronze fragment gleamed faintly in the spreading glow, a remnant of a story reclaimed. Clutching it, you felt the weight shift, no longer as a tether, but as a symbol of journey and release. The relic's chill was a quiet benediction, a bridge between worlds, once alive in hands you could almost imagine, now resting at peace. Your eyes drifted toward the tomb's mouth, where the faintest breeze stirred the air. Outside, the desert stretched wide and endless, the boundless, sands now welcoming rather than imprisoning. The distant, rhythmic whisper of shifting dunes blended with the soft rustle of ancient wind songs, inviting you home. You pictured the sun's rays breaking over the silent land beyond these walls, casting long shadows that retreated with gentle grace. A final breath escaped you, slow and unhurried, the hollow echo in the chamber now filled with the soft pulse of life renewed. It was as if the tomb, having held so many stories cloaked in dust, had exhaled a long-forgotten secret, a sigh made of stone and memory, released to the quiet night. You felt the cold stone withdraw its grasp, the crushing silence finally lifting like morning mist. Though your body still rested among the relics of time, your spirit was lighter, freed from the weight that had once threatened to turn you to stone. The sleep that had hovered at your edges now transformed into a gentle surrender, as the distant stars began their slow dance above the endless desert sky. As you closed your eyes, the whispered murmur that haunted the shadows faded into a lullaby, the ancient silence now cradling you in its calm embrace. You were no longer bound, no longer waiting. The tomb had finished its tale, and in that quiet ending, you found a soft, compelling peace. And so, under the watchful eyes of worn stone and fading light, the story rested. The dust settled gently, the shadows uncurled, and the ancient world sighed one last tranquil breath. You drifted, finally, into the dark, calm, complete, and held in quiet forever.